But every week we're going to be talking about an abundant life, and then we're going to try to follow that up on a Wednesday night with just trying to break it down. Here's what I need from some of you. For the month of July, I would like to pull together a prayer team. So who would like to get with me on Sunday mornings about 10 o'clock that we could pray for the service? And we'll meet in the office. Raise your hand if you will. Come on, I need some more volunteers. Meet at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. I'm going to offer it this Sunday as well. We'll just meet in the office for about 5 minutes just to pray over the Sunday morning service and just begin to create a little bit of a prayer team. As I said earlier, we need to be praying for our church. We may do a Thursday night prayer. We've done those before, and they've been real good. Just as we go through this transition, you know, we just don't want to give the enemy any room to bring any confusion or whatever as Brother Rodney transitions out. And so we want to make sure that's right. Last Wednesday, we were all geared up for church, and I got a phone call that said my dog wasn't doing good. Long story short, we had to put him down after 8 years of being a family member. Any of you ever put down a family pet? It's pretty tough. It's not something that I want to do anytime soon again, which we don't have another pet at the moment. We got one in the house. Are we live streaming? Yeah, we got one in the house that sometimes I want to put down. I'm going to love you, Rosie. No, figure whether. No, they know
Nana's got
she
her
doesn't
back.
like. She doesn't like Kyle. Kyle can come in the house. They locked her in her kennel, which is in another room with the door closed. And Kyle was there the other night. She just goes ballistic when he's in the house. She just will not shut up. Well, now she has started somewhat taking it out on me. So I walk in the door and she just doesn't stop. Yep, 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 yep. But we love Rosie. She's a little mixture between Chihuahua
and Poodle.
And Poodle. So she's a Chi-Poodle. And she's very, very, very protective over the baby. Very protective to the point of nipping at us sometimes when we go try to kiss on the baby. So, but anywho. So yeah, just real quick, let me tell you this. The lady that we had got our dog from, we had to put Diesel down Wednesday. That Wednesday night, I think it was.
Thursday.
Or no, that Thursday. I messaged her and I asked her, I said, are you still breeding boxers? Because she had breeded boxers for a long time. And, you know, I just said that, are you still breeding boxers or do you know anybody that is? And she messaged back and said, no, we don't think we're going to breed anymore. Our female had a rough time the last time, and so we don't think we're going to, you know, breed her again. And I said, well, we had to put Diesel down, and she knew Diesel because we got the puppy from her. And she messaged me back and said, you know, it must be a God thing. Now, the lady's a Christian lady, and her dogs have biblical names. So she messaged me back and she said, it must be a God thing because Sarah, who is the female, is ready to breed today. She's in heat. And, but we weren't going to breed her, but when you told me what happened to Diesel, we prayed about it and we felt like that we need to breed her one more time so that y'all get another puppy. And it was pretty exciting. She sent us, we did a little, what do you call it, FaceTime or whatever, where she was showing us the puppies and this and the other. So anyway, God is good because we're going to get our puppy, another puppy, and it's going to be good stuff. So anywho, you got your Bible? Let's do this. I'm going to do my best. I know I'm not going to stay on this stool, but I will do my best because I really, really want to break this down for us tonight and kind of dig a little deep into this. I want to talk about, we talked about this in Sunday school. Some of you were in there, but I want to go a little bit further with it. And I want you to go to Matthew chapter 17, verse 20 and 21. Well, no, I'm sorry. Let's start back in 17, verse 14. And we're going to go to 20 and 21. And verse 14 says this, and when they had come to the multitude, a man came to him, kneeling down to him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic and suffers severely, for he often falls into the fire and often falls into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they cannot cure him. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, How long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not cast it out? So Jesus said to them, because of your unbelief. For assuredly, I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Now we look at 21, it says, however, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. I got this title tonight, something that I don't do often, but the title of this is Mountain, Get Out of My Way. Now one thing that I've learned in my walk with God is that when I choose to walk with God, when I choose to have a faith walk, that there are obstacles to my faith. All right? Jesus addressed their lack of faith when it came to the situation with the boy. Now, we know that basically what was happening is he was having seizures. And this father, let me get off this. I just ain't comfortable on a stool. This father, who obviously had a concern for his child, was dealing with a situation in his family that was out of his control. And obviously, because he went to Jesus, he had a belief system that had Jesus as a part of that belief system. Now, I like to talk about the tenets of our faith when it's the basics like the blood of Jesus and salvation. But I also like to talk about the staples of our faith. You know, in the sense of, you know, when I grew up, my mama cooked a lot. We cooked around our house, and I'm sure you did as well, and you may still cook. And in every kitchen there was staples. What was some of those staples in every kitchen? Let's say salt was a staple, and pepper was a staple. So the seasoning, whenever you cooked, there was always these particular items that was there that seasoned the food to the taste. And the family had a preference of, some liked more salt, some didn't like salt. So there's these staples that have been through life and have carried on from generation to generation. You know what I'm talking about? The way Grandma cooked the turkey and the things that she used, it kind of passes on from generation to generation. And there's staples to our faith as well. And denominations sometimes tend to want to question our staples. Denominations sometimes kind of wants to push our thoughts or our staples to the side. And one of those staples that I believe that's in the Bible that has passed from generation to generation, and that is a staple of faith to believe God for the miraculous. All right? You see, this man here had, and we're talking about mountains, we're going to get a little more specific for a second, but this man had a mountain. He had an obstacle that was in the way of what he was believing God. It was in the way of, from his faith to what he was believing God for. There was an obstacle that was in between his faith and the manifestation of his faith. All right? Are you with me? You're tracking so far? So, the staple of believing God for the miraculous is something that in this day and time, when we read our Bible, they didn't have a lot of doctors to run to. They didn't have a lot of medication. And I would imagine, I remember there was a kid when I was in elementary school that had these seizures, and I think he actually had epilepsy, and he's still alive to this day. He lives in AB. And I remember being in class when he would have one of his seizures. And it was a really crazy, but for us kids, it was a really scary thing. And in that day, maybe they didn't have the technology. Maybe we didn't have the medicine. Maybe we didn't have whatever. But from the Bible time, think about this. When there wasn't doctors, there wasn't medication. But obviously, this man had a belief in the ability of Jesus to heal. All right? Have you ever had anything that you were believing God for, but you hadn't seen the manifestation of what you're believing God for? So there's something that is in the way, because if God, the tenets of our faith or the tenets of our belief system is faith. That's one of them. It's faith. And faith just simply says this, that I believe outside of my natural existence that there is a higher power that is able to work on my behalf and to cause things to work out or to happen that I can't create or cause to happen myself. That is kind of my thought of faith. In other words, if I'm, if there's more money than there is money, then sometimes I got to have faith that God is going to make something happen. We don't lean on our own understanding, but we put our trust and our faith in God to work things out. So this man had a situation in his family. His child was sick, and he went to Jesus, or he first went to the disciples, but there was something that was hindering the disciples from being able to see the manifestation of the healing. And there's a possibility, I guess, maybe that there was a discouragement that came upon this man because he knew that, hey, if I can get them or him there, that the miraculous can take place. Have you ever been in that place to where you said, if I could just get to the church on Sunday, if I could just get somebody to pray and believe with me, then this thing will break off of me, or this thing will break, or whatever, but you get there and it doesn't really happen the way that you think it should happen. All right? But Jesus dealt with this mountain, or this opposition of why this young man wasn't getting healed, by addressing their unbelief. Now let's talk about that second, because he's talking to his disciples. He's talking to the men that was serving with him. So there's something going on here that Jesus knows about these fellas or these men that maybe they don't know about themselves. Maybe they are going through this ritual way of doing it. Maybe they have seen Jesus do something, so maybe they're just trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? Just not mock, but just imitate what Jesus has done. Maybe they are like some Christians today, that they sit on a pew and they see other people raise their hands, so they just raise their hand and call that worship. Is anybody with me? But Jesus said, there's unbelief in you, and the reason that this thing can't come out is not because you don't have faith, it's because maybe you don't believe in yourself to be able to get it done. So one of the tenets, one of the staples of faith is that, number one, we've got to believe in ourselves. But there's these mountains that when Jesus addressed this, he said, because of your unbelief, before assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Now, we know that I've been to the Smoky Mountains. And the first time I went to the Smoky Mountains, have any of y'all ever been to the Smoky Mountains? By chance in Tennessee? All right. So when you're going, that route that you take, you kind of like go through Georgia and all that. And do you remember, Colton, maybe the first time you went, you kind of had this expectation because you've heard of the mountains, and you're coming up on the mountains and you can see them in the distance. And it's a pretty fascinating thing, isn't it? You just look and you see, man, this huge formation on earth. Well, we know that in reality, the chances of me being able to run up to one of those mountains that they've got named and say, get out my way, I'm going through, it's probably not going to happen. But I think what Jesus was doing was trying to be symbolic with the man of saying this, is we see things in our life sometimes as things that cannot be moved. You're literally not going to go move a mountain unless you hire a bunch of excavators and spend years and hundreds of hours of people literally just digging. But mountains are symbolic of the largest thing on earth. And Jesus compared this situation with saying, if you would only have faith of the smallest thing on earth, a mustard seed, you could move the largest thing on earth, which is a mountain. But metaphorically speaking, we know that in our life we have mountains, and some of those mountains that I've got written down here is death is a mountain, sickness is a mountain, trouble is a mountain, hardships are mountains, family crisis are mountains, and we have these things that happen in our life, and we look at them as sometimes things that will not be able to be moved. I think about times when we see someone that's addicted to drugs, and people that know them, maybe they look and they say, you know what, they're never going to change. They're never going to change. That person, they've been that way, they're never going to change. The problem with that is that when we don't have faith for something to change, chances are it's probably not going to change. I mean, there's power in death, or there's life and death in the power of the tongue. And a lot of change in this earth has a lot to do with how we speak about that change. And Jesus was making that very clear, that saying, if you would just have a little bit of faith, the things that you think are impossible. Maybe I'm thinking a little bit crazy, because if I can change it, I don't need faith. Am I right? If I can change my situation, if I can change the condition of my marriage, if I could change the condition of my children, if I could change the condition of my finances, if I could do it, I wouldn't need faith. But when I get in a position, or when I get in a situation to where it's out of my control, and I'm looking at it as it's out of control, I have either one option, just to accept it as normality, or move into a level of faith and daily believe God, that God is going to intervene and move that mountain. I don't know what the mountain is in your life. I know what the mountains are in my life. But I believe every day that God is going to move that mountain, because in many cases that mountain is what's dividing me from God's promise. Not God's promises, maybe a specific promise that God has put in my life. That mountain could be the thing that is in the way. Let's look over here at 1 Samuel 17. I see he's putting them up on here. We know the story of David and Goliath. David is going to battle Goliath. But I want to talk about the comparison of David and Goliath. 1 Samuel 17, 4-7 says this: And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze, and he had a bronze armor on his legs, and bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. Now we have a situation here in the story of David and Goliath. It's good versus evil. But the author is giving us a pretty good description of who he calls a champion. And everything that he describes about Goliath is massive. So in most people's mind, they would say David was facing a mountain of a man. I've heard that said about some people, you know, even in our community. Man, that dude was a mountain of a man. He was just huge. He was this. He was that. Well, here we have in the Bible, David is facing mountain of a man. But the problem is that mountain of a man is standing between Israel and the promises of God. So there is this mountain that is blocking or opposing the movement of God. God has said, I want you to go from here to here, but there's opposition in the middle, and right now it's called Goliath. And the Bible very specifically describes Goliath, and everything about him, he is built for battle. He is built for battle. But he's not only built for battle, the Bible is describing a man that is very, obviously very strong and very battle trained. Everything about him was big. Everything about him was huge. Everything about him that he carried was heavy. I mean, it was just, this is a big dude. Well, we look at David, who is going to fight Goliath. And if we go over to 1 Samuel 17, verse 40, it says, well, David, if we back up a little bit, they were trying to put some armor on David that wasn't going to work. And so the only explanation of David that we have, it says, then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag in a pouch, which he had, and his sling, which was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Now, we just had about 3 paragraphs of an explanation of the guy that he's fixing to fight. I mean, the guy's big, the guy's strong. Everything that he has says victory. Everything that he has says, don't come at me or I am about to whoop some tail. And then the Bible gives a definition or a description of David. It says he picked up some stones and he put them in a shepherd's bag that he already had, slingshot that he had, and he went toward this mountain. But here's what David, I didn't mark my scriptures right here. Verse 45. Here's the other thing that David had. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, Amen. The God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. So basically what he did is he approached the mountain with some weapons, but primarily he approached it with faith. He approached it with an understanding as he went on, and you go on and read that, because previously in his life, God had allowed him to kill a bear, to kill some other creatures that was attacking the sheep. And every time that God would use him to take out opposition, strengthen his faith to say, this might be a big obstacle, but it's really not me and my strength fighting it anyway. It's the strength of the Lord that has already given me victory in so many ways. Now I want to give you a couple of nuggets here on faith and why it's so important whenever we believe God, whenever we're standing in faith, believing God to move a mountain out of our life. I don't know, is anybody dealing with a mountain right now? All right. So first, we understand this. Faith moves mountains because faith enlarges the possibilities of life. You see, when you don't have faith, you only have one perspective. You have the perspective of the mountain that is in front of you. But when you have faith, when you add faith to the equation, then it changes the perspective that you have, because, let's put it this way. One person, if a person doesn't believe in faith and they go to a doctor, well, let's use Flo here. I'm just going to use you as an example. Let's say Flo goes to the doctor and the doctor gives her a bad report. Says, well, you got some bad disease. If she doesn't have faith, then she accepts that report as her destiny. But let's say Rory goes to the same doctor, and the doctor comes out, and they don't know each other, but Rory's next in line, and he goes in, and the doctor comes out and says, well, sir, I'm sorry, but you've got the same disease, but Rory's got faith. So Rory looks at that, he hears that report, but his faith gives him a different perspective for the different possibility of a different outcome. So it's something that we say quite often. We say, well, I'm a person of faith. I have faith. But faith truly does throw another perspective into the mix. Listen to this. When I was somewhat good at math, when I was growing up, I didn't do a lot of the advanced math, but I was pretty decent at math. But there was one thing I knew about math is this: that when you have an equation that you're trying to work out, and you change one variable in the equation, it changes the outcome of the equation. In other words, if I have 2 plus 2, that could be 4. But if I throw one variable into that equation, let's say I've got a -1, then that changes the outcome of the equation. Faith changes the outcome of the equation over our life. It's not something that we just say we do. It's something that we have to have internally. Faith in God to do the miraculous. Number 2. faith initiates God's grace. Okay? Faith initiates God's grace. What is God's grace? Now, I've always heard of the definitions of grace as unmerited favor, but basically, grace, the grace of God is God's compassion, if you will, to do for you what you can't do for yourself, and in some cases, what you don't even deserve Him to do. All right? So let's put it this way. If I am facing a Goliath, David was facing Goliath, and for some, the equation didn't have a good outcome. But David changed one thing in the equation, and that was his faith in God, which initiated the grace of God on David's life to fight Goliath. Are you with me? I know it's getting late, but are you with me? It initiated the grace of God, which David more than likely could have not beaten Goliath by himself. But when God's grace showed up, it changed the equation, and God allowed David to be victorious. So we have to have the grace of God in our life. Faith does not constrict possibilities. Let me just read a couple things I got written here. Faith enlarges the possibilities. It creates new possibilities. A problem is only a problem as long as there is no solution. If there is even a hint of a possibility of a solution, you don't have the same problem. If you've got God in your life, you'll have problems, but with God in your life, there's always other possibilities. In other words, the Israelites was in Egypt, and they were in bondage. Maybe to them, they didn't have any other possibilities of getting things worked out, and maybe freedom was a mountain, or the thought of freedom was a mountain. But God entered the scene, and the grace of God showed up. Moses showed up, and the equation changed. All of a sudden, there's a different perspective on freedom. But they had to have faith, didn't they? And their faith was tested as they was going out from Egypt, out from the opposition, out from the bondage, out from the things that was keeping them away from God's promises. And the lack of faith began to constrain their ability to see God's grace. But faith that runs rampant does not constrain God's grace. God is the author of the possibility. Jesus could have died on the cross, but God created a new possibility and caused him to rise from the dead. So just know this as we finish up. To say you have faith is one thing. It's when you are faced with a situation that demands your faith is where the rubber begins to meet the road. You with me? It has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with the fact that you went to church Sunday. It has everything to do with you having a relationship with God, understanding that you are cleansed by the blood of Jesus, and that you have a working relationship with the Father, that you know that by faith, whenever you approach that mountain, approach that giant, and you can have faith as a mustard seed, God says that His grace is going to show up, His mercy is going to show up, and I'll use another word, His anointing will show up. Now, that's a word sometimes that denominations get scared of because it's a power that comes from on high when you get full of the Spirit, and the Spirit of God begins to cause you to be strengthened beyond what you can normally be strengthened to move that mountain. Mountains aren't going to physically move, but it's the way we perceive. Faith causes you to see things from a different perspective. And whenever you can look at that mountain and say, you know what, that mountain is not an obstacle, it's a challenge. And it is a challenge that we're going to call fire down from heaven, and we're going to see God show up and demolish the mountain. Amen?
Amen.
So have faith. Have faith. God is for you, And if God be for you, can't nobody be against you. So have faith and know that God is able to move mountains. Amen?
Amen. You know, one thing I want to
Yes.
say. The Lord was just impressing on me. A lot of times we have a situation that we want to be moved or we want it to change. And because it don't, then we question, do I really have faith, or am I completely doubtful or whatever? Sometimes I believe God puts us in situations to test our faith and to teach us that even when we don't see the circumstance work out like we wanted it to, or we don't get that complete healing like we wanted to, or it didn't come in our timing, is when our trust, our faith is exercised through our trust. Do I still trust in God even if it didn't work out the way I wanted it to? Because I've had times where I know I've had at least enough faith as a mustard seed, but it still didn't work out, or I didn't get the answer that I wanted right away, or it never came the way I thought it should. But in the long run, I look back and go, God, if I had gotten what I wanted at that time, it wouldn't have been the right thing anyway. But there's a reason. I can't see it, but my faith still has to say, okay, I have faith to believe that God can remove this mountain, but I trust that God has a work to work it out, even if it don't end up the way I want it to. Because I believe that, sometimes we do. People have questioned that. They pray for things and they don't get what they're expecting, or they don't get that healing. Then they're like, oh, well, I just don't believe in that faith thing, or I don't believe, it's hard for me to believe it because I didn't get it the way I wanted. But I believe goes with faith is that trust and understanding the relationship I have with God. I have faith. That little bit of faith can keep you founded or grounded in your trust, knowing that even when it don't come out the way I want, I have to hold on to my trust and belief in Him for that.
There's, just to finish this up, when I talk about how denominations have really, in some cases, messed people's thinking up, you'll hear some people talk about the faith movement. Have you ever heard that? Have you ever heard somebody say, well, the faith movement, you talk about the Benny Hinn's and all that. But the Bible says without faith, it's impossible to please God, right? So when you categorize faith as a movement, then what you do is you're taking one of the basic tenets of our belief system out of the question and saying, well, it's just a movement. No, it is what moves a movement. It's faith. I have to have the faith in God to do the impossible in order to cause my life to continue going forward. If I don't have faith, and if I bring that down to just a movement, then I have to be a part of that movement for God to do something. I know some pervert that to some degree, but faith is something that you should receive when you receive God, because God is faith. And if God lives in me, then the faith of God is in me. And I just have to possess that faith and work that faith. Does that make any sense?
Amen.
So, all right. I think I did pretty good. I didn't get you preaching tonight, did I, William? I think I just stayed kind of in a teaching mode and did it. It was all good. Hallelujah.
Amen.
Gotta get one little hallelujah. No, God's good, and y'all be praying. And again, if you would like to.